Hey y'all, welcome to the Team LoCoFit Roundtable, hosted by me, Laurin Conlon, owner of Team LoCoFit. Each week, I am joined by one of our coaches to dive headfirst into the nutrition, training, mindset, and coaching strategies we use with our clients. If you loved the show, please subscribe, leave us a review, tell a friend, you know the drill. And for more information about coaching, the programs we offer, and additional content, visit teamlocofit.com.
Also, I think what is...
They're literally just in denial. Like, they're not paying attention to the audience.
Or they're just, like, stuffing everything down and, like, just ignoring it. You know what I mean? Because you can stop a fight by just being like, okay. But that's not resolving anything. Also, too, kind of with that, which is also personality differences, right? Like, Everybody is going to have very distinct personalities, and some people are much more aggressive than others, right? Mm-hmm. So if somebody is super aggressive, and then the person that they're dating or even friends with or whatever is not, there's going to be like a huge, if two people are aggressive, that's going to be like a clash. Mm-hmm. But if one person is and then the other one isn't, then it's always going to kind of be like this, like almost like squashed feeling. I don't know if, like, what the technical term would be, like kind of like a more defeated feeling, and you just kind of okay, but then that's when you see that person just like blow up out of nowhere and you're like, whoa, like what are you mad about? And it's like, oh, all these 18 things that like we talked about before that like you're super aggressive, but I'm not, and then there's just different ways that, on top of communication, like people just are different with personalities, like kind of like the love language thing, like some people are different there. You have to also understand like who you're talking with, like what their personality is. Like if somebody has a really hard time opening up and you're really open, like you can't expect that person just to tell you everything because that's just not how they are. And vice versa. So it's
and this is a good understanding for couples who are just starting a relationship. Once you get past the general euphoric period of a relationship, where you meet a person and everything they do is wonderful and great and they can do no wrong and they're the most amazing person in the world, once all the fairy tale part of that dies down, now we're left with the realities of this individual, and can this individual actually love me? And so if you want a relationship to work, you have to be willing to change, certain patterns within yourself. If you're an abrasive person, this is the same thing we've talked about in previous podcasts. It's like, I'm a therapist, and in one hand I will be empathetic, I will be safe, I will be soft and subtle, and then other times I'm going to be more direct, and at times may even come off as harsh or abrasive. And so you have to understand and you have to kind of adjust. And so if you're a person who's very direct and straightforward to the point, but the person you're with doesn't receive that message and you love them and you care about them, let's not forget that piece. You're supposed to love this person. So there comes an effort that you're going to have to make to change yourself and to change some of those patterns. You don't just get to say, well, I am who I am. Well, okay, that's a very immature perspective. And if you want to go from relationship to relationship because you never want to change and you're this completely narcissistic person, if that's you out there that I'm talking to, narcissists their feelings don't get hurt that often anyway, so it's okay. But that
plays into the single thing, right? Like that plays into like, it's just easier to be single because I don't need to change myself. I can do exactly what I want. My house looks like how it wants. Like I don't have to compromise. Like I can do whatever I want, whenever I want. And it is something that, if you want to like not have any friends or be alone forever, like that's a good way to live. And I'm not saying that everybody needs to be in a relationship, because I also think that that's important for people to not be in relationships for periods of time, in my opinion. Yeah. I think that is another, like being too, like we'll call it independent, right? And not wanting to compromise is not good, but also being too codependent and not being able to do anything on your own, like that's also another huge issue. But you have to.
There are a lot of ways to end relationships, and being so stubborn to not change is one of them. It's kind of like if I don't want a job and I have 3 job offers, right? And I don't want to be the person who just says, look, I'm taking option C because it's a better fit for me. I call company A and I say, I want this salary. And they're like, well, there's no way we can pay you that. Well, then I'm sorry, this won't work out. So what did I just do? Right? I kind of like negotiated my way out of the deal, right? And so by being stubborn and not flexible and not willing to change and not make any concessions anywhere, you're essentially making it impossible for that person to be in a relationship with you. And so you're essentially setting in path the course of failure. You're negotiating your way out of that. And what I've seen, and I think you and I have actually kind of talked about this before, is there's been a shift in, I don't know if it's cultural or generational or whatever it is, but In today's society, people have this belief that they deserve to be happy. And in previous generations, the idea was you get married, you're married, right? And so if a person did something that threatened the marriage, for example, an affair, old logic was, you go talk to your grandparents' generation, they were like, you worked through that. You're married, you made a commitment to each other, and the idea was you're going to go to counseling or do whatever it is that you need to do, but you're going to stay together and you're going to work through that. In today's society, and those of you who want to do a fun social experiment, do this. Go to one of your or two of your friends or some of your coworkers and say to them, oh, I just found out that my significant other cheated on me.
I know exactly what they're going to say.
And the first piece of advice they're going to give you is dump their ass. Yeah. Leave them, right? And so there's been this shift to where, and I say that because it kind of talks a little bit about what we were just discussing before about putting effort into a relationship, about being willing to change and grow with that person. This is a relationship. It is a living, breathing thing. You are two individuals who are creating something new together, and you're of equal share in this. And so if you're so stubborn and you believe these things and you're unwilling to change, be prepared to be single or go from relationship to relationship, because it's not the way to make a healthy relationship. So if you want to just have 1 or 2 year long relationships and then move to the next one, if that's who you are, not judging that, that's fine. Understand that though, that it's difficult to create a long-term relationship with that type of dynamic or personality.
Yeah, people often want both of those things. They want a long-term commitment, but then they don't want to, make compromises or have things happen that maybe aren't ideal. You know what I mean? Like they want this perfect relationship 24/7, and they don't understand that it's hey, that's just not reality. There's going to be good times, there's going to be bad times, and if you want to stay with somebody, you're going to kind of have to ride those out. And if you don't, then don't do it. But then also don't complain that there's nobody good out there, and that, you know what I mean? All these things, I can't find it. You're what? You didn't even try to work through this. You just said no, fuck off. And now, obviously, there are going to be situations where it's hard no, right? Somebody's abusive. Hey, get out of that immediately. But really outside of that, I feel a lot of things, like you said, if you go and do that at social experiment, right? Everybody would say that, you're so much better than that. You don't need them. Mind you, there was no context of why that happened, right? They don't know anything about what you've been doing for the past year in that relationship. Maybe you were cheating on the person first. Maybe you've been a total fucking asshole. Maybe you're never home. Maybe you're, you know what I mean? There's all these reasons, and it's not excusing people's behavior, the other person's behavior, but you also have to look at yourself and not just judge somebody else.
Correct. And that's always, it's looking at the totality of the situation, the wholeness of it, rather than looking at a specific or isolated incident. But the idea of that shift has occurred. And I was going to say it was generational, but I don't think it is. I think it is more, it is generational, but I think that people outside of just one generation are feeling that way just because of the way the culture has changed. People who are across different, whether you're 20 or you're 50, you could be saying that same thing. Correct.
So I don't think it's generational. I think it's just...
Right. It's a shift within our society. And, there's a lot of indicators and a lot of different research and things that you can look at. Things just don't seem to be made to last. And I think the idea of it is, for many people, they're getting into relationships or even marriages, and in the back of their mind, they're well, I'll just get a divorce. And I'll move on, and the grass is always greener, because what makes other relationships or other people more appealing sometimes is, the fantasy of that person. It's the grass is greener on the other side kind of a thing. And it's when you're in a relationship and you're familiar with each other and things aren't really new anymore, and the idea of just saying well, forget this isn't as fun, this isn't making me happy. This idea that we deserve happiness instead of learning to create peace and learning to appreciate things. In couples, and that's not saying you have to be miserable in your relationship, but, I almost think that's a plan. In the past, people were I'm going to get a divorce, not because I'm unhappy, but I'm going to get a divorce because I could be happier, right? And so there's something really weird about that, and that shift and that change, but it's occurred, you could blame it on social media, you could change, our consumer habits, things just don't seem to last anymore. Everything is quick, everything is now. Nothing seems to be really in depth. I remember, it's one of the reasons why podcasts, I feel like, are a really great forum now, because it allows people to take a specific subject or a particular topic and dive into it a little bit, rather than it being, how long are the Instagram videos? Like 10 seconds? Like when you pop, it's like, that's where we're getting our information in 10-second feeds.
Or even, the classic news sources or short form article, and that's where real clickbait started, was on those kinds of things. Obviously that's trickled down into social media too, but if you are on I don't even watch TV, so I don't know, ABC, right? Is that still around? Say somebody, or the news networks, right? Fucking whatever. You're on there for 2.5 minutes, and you have to try and cram all of this stuff, and then your words can get chopped up even more, and then people see one part and they're like, oh my gosh, I can't believe somebody said that, and then it's like, well, did you hear what happened 30 seconds later, or did they just chop it here? And then now that went viral, so to speak, right? So now you've only heard one piece of it, and it's just kind of snowballs that way. So yeah, I think that whether it's cultural or whatever the hell it is, those words, media, social media, culture, all of that is changing, and you're right. It's just hey, and yeah, not just oh, I'm not happy, I want to be happier, or you can't learn to create newness or happiness or compromise really with anything. And I also think that within that relationship, you need to be able to figure out, okay, hey, I'm my own independent person, I do my own independent things. We both have our own things that we do, and then there's other things that we do together. We don't have to do everything together.
Correct.
And we also don't have to do everything apart. Kind of having those things that you enjoy.
And it's being at peace with that.
Yeah, I think a lot of people are oh, if we're not back to the whole, diet and training, whatever, with your significant others or friends or whatever it might be, you don't have to do the same things, right? You can have completely different goals, completely different, just things you do on the side that you enjoy. What if I wanted to take up painting? And I was like, oh my God, I love painting, right? And then, my friends or whoever I was with were like, that's fucking stupid. Well, I'm not saying that you need to paint. I'm just doing this, right? And that's a really silly example, but that is what happens on a larger scale. And I think that people think now of sudden, okay, well, this person is dieting or training or doing this competition and has a totally different mindset. No, it's okay. You don't have to do this. I'm just doing it, but I would like you, we can do support together, I support you, you support me, and then we kind of just figure that out. And I think that that's actually probably a really good thing, that to have your own separate things, in my opinion at least, because, and maybe that's just my own bias, but if you if you're always doing stuff together and you never have things that are separate, it's well, I feel that can get a little dicey.
Yeah, and again, it's one of those things that to me, what works for you and your relationship is what matters most. So if you have two people who don't want to not be without each other and they're totally happy doing every little thing together, cool, more power to you. But other couples and most people require some level of separation from their family. And not just separation isn't God, I need a time out, but it's this is for me. You're a parent. It's important for your kids to understand and to see that there are other values and things that are important in your life, and that you're not just there to take care of them 24/7.
Because they live up to that.
Well, it also mimics. It's I want you to see, because kids listen to and they respond and they will behave more by what they see rather than by what you say. So it's not about what you're saying to mom. It's about how you're saying it to mom. It's not about how you tell them to express their anger. What they see is you punching holes in the wall and throwing stuff across the room, or when mom and dad are arguing, are they respecting each other? And that ultimately starts to embed their kind of process for how they want to argue and how they want to receive love. And so, finding somebody who kind of has the same thoughts and process and value system and is the same as you is actually a pretty good way to have a relationship. Not that you can't have some differences, but differences, the opposites attracting is it doesn't last for the most part, because you're too different.
I'm sure on certain areas too. You know what I mean? There's obviously ones that matter more with differences. But so what are some signs of an unhealthy relationship, again, on kind of all these fronts, that maybe you need to identify with other people or you need to identify with yourself to make changes?
Well, so we can go back to that kind of 4-tier process that we talked about in our very first podcast, physical, social, emotional, occupational. So, is the person controlling? Have they forced you to change your job, change your friends? Do you no longer have physical safety, meaning that the person is abusing you, physically or emotionally? Are they putting you down all the time? Are they spending lots of money? Are you losing money? That's kind of a generic way of looking at it. But it's kind of like, sometimes I've had clients sit down and do a pros cons list. I'll ask, like, what are the benefits of this relationship? What do you get out of it? What needs does it meet? And in what ways does this relationship make you feel terrible? And sometimes when they write it out and they see it, it's kind of like, holy crap. But the reality is what are you feeling on a day-to-day basis within that relationship? Are you feeling safe? Are you feeling secure? Are you feeling loved? Are you feeling supported? And if a client is sitting there telling me, I don't feel supported, I don't feel loved, I don't feel appreciated, I don't feel like they put any time and effort into it, it's like, okay, this is not a healthy relationship. It's a relationship, and people stay in unhealthy relationships. And for some people, unhealthy relationships, unfortunately, are a way of expressing love. And it's what they know, it's what feels familiar to them. They're used to being ignored or neglected or minimized in some way. And so it's about that individual. And you can't push somebody to leave another person based off of your own ideals. And so it's just about helping that person discover and become aware, giving them the tools they need to make the changes that they need to make that relationship more successful. But a buy-in from the other person. If one person's coming to couples counseling, it's individual counseling at that point, and so that says something.
And you can do individual, but also doing together, right? Like that's usually what people do.
You can. Generally speaking, you're a couple.
No, I know, but don't most people come together and then also do separate sessions?
Sometimes they can. And again, it depends on the therapist. They may, but it's like, again, now you're talking to the therapist privately about something that the other person is doing.
And they need to hear.
But it's affecting, and that person needs to know, and we need to create strategies around this and address it and bring it out into the open. But you're telling me, but you won't tell them. And I appreciate that sense of trust. But it's like, what's our goal here? Yeah. To alleviate the burden from your shoulders or to improve the status of your relationship?
And within this context too, I think that's something that can become really unhealthy within whether it's a competitor or it's just in general kind of like the where diet and training and kind of all of this lifestyle can kind of go sideways, right? Sometimes I think that the partner or the friend might have ideas of what that can turn into. It's not actually real, but they are like, oh, I don't want you to become this, right? And they have these kind of preconceived notions of what it might be. Obviously, that's going to be easy to take care of if you live your actions not like that, right? Like, hey, like I'm not going to be like that. And then after a month or so, like they're like, oh, okay, like this person is not acting how I thought they were going to. That's taken care of. But it can get really unhealthy, particularly in the competitive space, competing in any aspect, right? If you become so obsessed with competing that now you're neglecting your relationships and you're neglecting, everything else that's important. Now, I also understand that there is a time and a place for everything, right? So if you are communicating to your partner, hey, I have a competition coming up in the next month. I'm going to be spending a lot more time getting ready for this. There are times where I might be a little bit more short on my mood. There's going to be there are times to where it's like, okay, like, the end is near, like the light is at the end of the tunnel. And there might be physiological or psychological reasons that, they're like your relationship isn't the number one priority and they need to be ready for the competition. And that's just what competitors deal with.
Sure.
And I think that that's important as long as, again, you communicate with that person, like, hey, this is kind of how it's going to be going. If you just don't let anybody know that you're going to be spending way more time doing X, Y, Z, then the person's like, well, hey, what have you been doing? You're like, well, I'm fucking getting ready for this. Don't you know that? You don't support me. It's like, no, you just didn't tell them what's going on. So I think that if, as long as there are boundaries around that, but not the, hey, 1 month out things are going to get really hard versus, okay, now year round I'm a psycho because this is all that I care about, all that I think about, even in a off season or a non-competition prep stage. And this again goes for all types of competitors. And I think that people who have a competitive mindset, it's really easy to fall into that kind of selfish behavior because that's what people are used to and that's what's comfortable and that's what pushes you forward in that space. But then it's like, okay, well, what else is behind you? Like, what did you leave behind that might not be taken care of that you need to have kind of conversations? So I think that in an unhealthy, things can turn really unhealthy in this situation. if you're like competing or anything like that, if you are not prepared to really, one, just let somebody know like kind of what you're doing, what your expectations are, like, or even, I mean, this happens with work too, like, hey, I'm starting this new business, like things are going to be crazy this month, or hey, this is like, I'm going to be traveling all the time, like, and these are things that you have to just express to somebody. It doesn't necessarily mean that you have an unhealthy relationship, it just means that you need to tell the person that. But if that happens repeatedly and nonstop, there's no break from that, that's kind of when I feel like it gets out of control, right?
Sure, yeah. If you stress something so much to such a degree that it's no longer what it once upon a time was, you're treading in dangerous waters. I don't love the analogy, but it's I guess it's one of the ones that works best. It's kind of like if you consider your relationship to be like a bridge. Bridges have very specific parameters and guidelines. It has weight-bearing limits. So it's like, okay, this particular bridge can hold 10,000 pounds or whatever it is. Well, think of your relationship in that same context. Your relationship can handle so much stress, it can handle so much anxiety, and it develops naturally and normally. And so when you take something like a competition, especially a physique competition, which is a little different than most other types of competitions because of the dramatic changes that it makes in your mood and your presentation and the day-to-day changes in your personality and your lifestyle. Like, case in point, you've announced to your team and everybody that you're doing a jiu-jitsu competition. I think you will find the preparation for your jiu-jitsu competition completely different than what you would a physique competition, right?
Well, yeah.
Okay, so more to my point, you might have more.
Well, also, I'm not very good, but
the point being,
yeah,
your classes are going to be more intense, they're going to be more specific to competitions, and we're going to be gearing it toward that at that point in time. But once you leave the school, you're going to go home and it's going to be the same thing.
Yeah.
You're a fitness competitor, you're going home and you're still thinking about your eating, you're still thinking about your measurements, you're thinking about all of these different things.
It's never
ending. Consuming. So really what you're doing is you're taking a bridge that has a 10,000 pound limit, and now you're putting 15,000 pounds on it, you're putting 20,000 pounds on it, but your expectation is that it's still going to hold the same weight. It doesn't work that way, because the other person is the one supporting that relationship, and they might be supportive, but to an extent. And this is kind of
everybody has a limit.
Everybody has a limit, and this is what I was talking about earlier, so it's kind of nice to come full circle, and this might be kind of a really great last kind of talking point for us as far as it relates to the relationship podcast, but we can talk about more, is the idea of there's a great therapist, her name is Esther Perel, and she talks about the concept of romantic idealism. And romantic idealism is this idea and the belief that the other person that is in your life, this relationship that you have, is that one and only, is that person. And it's embedded in the fact that we grow up listening to fairy tales and we hear all these wonderful things. And just to go over what some of the expectations are, like when you ask a person, what do you want in a significant other? And you hear things like, well, they have to be my greatest lover, and they have to be my best friend and my confidant, and they are my one true love, and they are my emotional companion and my intellectual equal and my financial supporter. Stop for a second. How can one person be all of those things? And we still perpetuate this throughout our life. We grow up with the ideas that the person we love has to be our one and only, our true, right? And that they're going to embody all of these things. You don't embody all of those things for yourself, let alone somebody else to fill those shoes. And it still continues to be pushed. So one of the things that I did was to kind of help illustrate this point is we get these messages from a lot of different places. We grow up with it, and our parents will tell us, well, your boyfriend or your girlfriend is going to treat you like a queen or a king. That's a pretty big bar, right? Pretty high. And so we set these expectations.
Unrealistic expectations.
Right, we set these expectations. And one of the things that I said earlier was that love is conditional. You don't get to be a total asshole. You don't get to treat me in certain ways and expect me to stay. So here's something to kind of help prove my point. The artist Pink, she has a song, and I've heard it a number of times. It's called Love Me Anyway.
This is not what I was expecting you to bring up in the notes, but
but I'm
glad to know that you're a Pink fan.
I printed the lyrics. Yeah. Let's stay away from boy bands, okay? Anyway, and Nickelback.
Everybody hates Nickelback.
I know, but sell out arenas. I can't figure it out. No one likes them, but they sell out 40,000 stadiums, and it's
do
like
they really?
they do. They do worldwide tours. Anyway, we're getting off track here. So in the song "Love Me Anyway," I just highlighted a few of the lyrics, and so some of them go: "Even if I break your heart, if I flirt with all the other boys, would you still stay? Could you still hold me when it hurts, even when I scandalize you, cut you down, criticize you, tell a million lies about you? Will you still love me anyway?" The answer to that, Pink, is no.
We are telling you definitely. The answer is no.
The expectation is that people will love you through anything, and we've created this persona that a person has to be vigilant and they have to be this amazing, beyond expectation person, right? Like we've created a facade that is so unobtainable. But the expectation is that no matter what I do, no matter what I say, you will still love me, and that's wrong. You cannot treat people that way. You can't take so much advantage of this relationship that it no longer is that relationship, that I become a whipping boy for you, or that this relationship is that leftover piece. You're giving me the leftovers. You're saying everything else is super important, but not this relationship. So how do you expect it to survive? You're overloading it with all of your crap. You're breaking that bridge, that trust that exists between us. You can't do that. And there will be
But
people...
that's different than what you were saying earlier about how older generations were like, we're going to stick through it, we're going to work through it. Because the difference there is that now you're not trying to work through anything, you're just expecting somebody to be this
yes,
thing.
and don't get me wrong, relationships end. Even in our parents' generations, right, they still got divorces. I'm not saying that it wasn't...
Yeah, I just wanted to make that distinction.
Correct, and you're absolutely right. That is a really important distinction to make. I'm not saying that you need to stay in that relationship because you have to be a martyr to the cause now. It's like, I'm not a martyr. I'm not going to stay. Relationships are a two-way street. Now, can I put my own needs and my own desires aside to help support you for this time period? Yes, but do me a favor, and for you competitors who are doing this, who are going through these constant cycles, what are you doing after your competitions are over to help support that other person, to bring, this is kind of that repair technique, to bring balance back to the relationship, to unburden the load, to take the load on yourself and allow that person to pursue something. Like, it becomes these really selfish things, these year-round competitors. People want to go from show to show to show, and if their husbands or wives aren't in that same space, you're putting a tremendous amount of burden and an unfair expectation.
Even if they are doing this, even if you're dating a competitor or married to a competitor, it doesn't matter. It can still be really taxing. Now, back to one of the original things we said, if whatever you're doing, try to do it in a way that is like least damaging or burdensome to your family, your friends, any kind of relationship, right? But at some point, if you are trying to be a competitor, like, something has to give at some point, right? Like, hey, this last month, things are going to get really hard. But again, that can't be this year-round thing, and that's where and especially for physique competitors, just because of, not only are you spending a lot of time doing something because it's competition related, like I said, me getting ready for this, I'm almost like, am I doing everything right? Like, because literally it's just like, hey, I need to, probably go to a few more classes, tailor my training a little bit, but everything else is kind of the same. Like, I leave and life is normal. With competing or physique competitions, life is not normal. You know what I mean? You're at a essential level body fat where you basically have to take a nap every day, otherwise you can't even stay awake. It's like, you can't expect somebody to, yes, they support you, but it's like, okay, at some point, like, when are you not going to be this like corpse of a person?
There has to be a light at the end of the tunnel.
Yeah. Or if I was like, hey, I'm going to be doing this jiu-jitsu competition, and now I was going to 3 classes a day. Like, do you know what I mean? Which, like, I'm sure there are people who do that, right? And it's like, for a short amount of time, sure, you could do that. It's like, that's what you're trying to do to be like the very best. But are you doing that year round, right? Like, so there has to be some kind of give. Otherwise, the bridge will crumble, to kind of loop that. Do bridges crumble? I don't know. I have to get an engineer on that, but...
certainly break.
They're going to break. They might not crumble.
Collapse.
There we go. That's the word I was looking.
Bridges collapse.
Perfect. All right, guys. So that's all we have for relationship stuff, I guess. I don't really know what to call this, but just relationships in general. And I think this is such an important topic, and I know it's important because this comes up in almost every update with people, right? And it's it's not an every week thing, but it is something that's incredibly important, no matter if you're just starting out on this kind of like health and fitness journey, or you are a seasoned competitor, or really everything in between. Relationships are what our whole lives are built off of, whether they're your spouse or your friends or your family or your kids, whatever it is. relationships rule everything. So unless you want to be somebody who's just a total, just like a hermit by themselves, you need to learn how to communicate with people and have relationships. So anything else?
Yeah, just one
More
other
song lyrics from Pink?
No song lyrics.
Are we gonna play it?
Would be great if we could do like that song
Yeah.
as we fade out to Pink. Just some last pieces of advice, I guess, to remind people of is that when you are in a relationship, one of the biggest hurdles or things that you can do or that people struggle with is they fail to assume the emotional position of their partner, meaning they fail to see this from their perspective. And so you might have your perspective on diet, nutrition, and changing your lifestyle, but if you can't put yourself in that person's shoes, if you can't see this from their perspective and understand how it's affecting them, then the bridge between you guys is going to divide, it is going to collapse, and you're going to separate. It's going to create a lot of tension in that relationship. And I think sometimes it's really important to go back to that point that two people will experience something completely differently. And what this to you might be a journey of self-discovery and self-improvement and fun and exciting. For other people, it is not those things, and it can be quite the opposite for them. And so reminding yourself that yes, this is important, but so is your relationship. And you can put things on hold and you can shift and priorities can, shift around. But ultimately that relationship requires love. It requires your attention. It requires your effort. And so if you're not putting that in, if you aren't putting that desire back into the relationship, the same desire that you were using. And what does that mean? It's that desire for attention, to make that person feel special, to make them feel important. Those are really important qualities. And those are qualities that a lot of times couples who have been together for a long time struggle with, because desire fades. It does have a shelf life. And it doesn't, I should say this, it isn't just natural anymore. It requires effort to create those things. And so I think that's the one piece that I really wanted people to, as we leave and kind of back out of this podcast, is just like really work to understand the emotional position of your partner and the people that are in your life. And there's a difference between people who are going to be supportive of you and people who are just going to bring you down. And learning to set boundaries around that is different. But hopefully, this addressed some of the issues that some of your clients face and got something out of it.
Yeah, this was really useful, and I know that this is something that literally everybody deals with. So if you guys have any other questions, you can send us an email at info@teamlocofit.com. Rick has also been doing consulting, so we will put the email, because it's kind of a long email, in the show notes. If you are interested, you can reach out there, and we will catch you guys next time. That was really good.
Yeah, I had fun with that one. It was more the conversation that we talked about, right?
Well, that's what I was aiming for.